Hello and welcome to this SlimDevOps episode 20. This was originally streamed live on twitch.tv/SlimDevOps on the 14th of October. And today I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Kyle Quest. Hello Kyle, how are you?
Great. Looking forward to the discussions and questions.
Indeed. So I can see that some of our friends, in fact, a new friend of ours, so we were just talking to Neil from the streaming in the booth here at KubeCon. So that's where you are. You're actually on the show floor at KubeCon at the moment, right?
Oh, right there. Right there.
So, a couple of weeks ago, we were streaming from the Open Source Summit, and it's KubeCon this week. So welcome back, Big Pod. Hello, Neil, who goes by Conan Kudu in the chat here. So, yeah, you said it's a very empty KubeCon. I think it's people are being cautious still, I think. So the purpose of this stream was so Kyle, if you'd just like to introduce yourself, explain who you are.
Let's see. Quite a few things, but I'll keep it short. I created DockerSlim a few years back, trying to solve my own problems. And eventually it got a lot more traction because it turned out that the problem that I solved for myself and the people I worked with was a problem that others had. And they liked the idea. They started using the tool, and as the tool got used a lot more, there were a lot of more ideas around the concept of application-centric intelligence and solving the DevOps problems and container problems using an application-centric approach, that it made sense to build something that's even more awesome. And that's how SlimAI was started. And AI stands for application intelligence because, like I mentioned it during the virtual booth, application intelligence is the core concept behind the idea, and it's what sets it apart from most of the existing tools in the cloud-native tooling space, where they are infrastructure-centric. Right. And that means they're agnostic, generic, and it's nice, but they don't understand what kind of applications are running, or they can't do anything to help with the applications that are running on them. And because of that, you have to do a lot of stuff manually to get the artifacts those tools and the infrastructure they work with need, specifically the production-ready containers, optimized, following the best practices and all of that. That's all on you to get the containers in that shape, and it shouldn't have to be if you understand what the application is doing, what it is, what it needs. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, and we want to apply the same concept to containers, multiple containers, clusters of containers, the whole life cycle around containers, and other technologies and tech layers in the cloud-native stack. Because the problem is still the same, regardless whether or not it's containers or not. And the concept applies the same way. And like I mentioned in the virtual booth, my original POC actually didn't even involve containers. The same applies to other cloud infrastructure and applications. You have to do a lot of manual work, and that's not really what you should be doing. And that's what we want to change. And that's the part, redefining how DevOps is done. A lot of manual work is now a part of the process, and it should go away. Just like you no longer write programs in assembly. That used to be the case. You had to write things in assembly. Now it's not the case. It's gone.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So for those of you that are in the stream, if you've got questions, Kyle and I will try our best to field them. Interested in questions about DockerSlim, obviously, given that was, a very successful project that Kyle created that led to the formation of SlimAI. But also, if you've got any container tech related questions, Kyle is, I would say, a subject matter expert.
I wouldn't say that, but I'll be happy to share whatever I know.
I think you're being modest. What was you gave a talk a couple of days ago? What you just want to quickly summarize what you were presenting?
Yeah, so with KubeCon, there's a bunch of zero-day events and kind of mini conferences, quite a few of them, and one of them is called eBPF Day. And eBPF, it's kind of one of those interesting emerging technologies that enable a lot of interesting opportunities. They provide you with a way to plug into different parts of the system and do whatever you want to do. There's a lot that, like pretty much any part of the system, can be hooked into, and there are different types of hooks. Syscall hooks, system activity hooks, networking hooks, different levels. There's a lot with networking. So that day, the eBPF day, is about kind of the tech and the the new things emerging in the space, and things that people do with eBPF, what they build with on top of that, and with Kubernetes. One of the things that happened, that there's a number of Kubernetes tools that take kind of native eBPF tools like BPF Trace that allows you to, it kind of gives you this awk-like high-level interface to the low-level eBPF tech, and you can script hooks and all of that. And it's cool for basic kind of experiments, but at some point you outgrow things like that, and you want something custom. So there's a tool called kubectl Trace that allows you to run BPF Trace, this high-level eBPF exploration tool, on Kubernetes. And the talk was about kind of the next step when you outgrow both of them and you want to create something yourself. And this is something that doesn't get enough attention, because usually during these conferences and the related talks in general, you get talks about new tools, and they talk about how to install the tool, how to run it, and what you get out of that, but you don't get to see the engineering part of it. How was it built? How can it be built? What are the questions that you need to answer when you're building one of those tools? And that's what I try to do, kind of building a file system monitoring, Kubernetes tracing application, leveraging eBPF, and covering different libraries. There's a whole bunch of eBPF libraries for different languages. And, for example, there's libraries for Python, C, Go, Rust, Ruby, and etc. So if you're a developer or want to develop something, that's one of the big questions. You need to figure out what libraries do I use. So there's so many of them. It's just overwhelming, and you don't know which one to use because they're not all perfect. They don't cover everything. So right. I kind of spent some cycles on that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. I know I saw a presentation from the performance team at Netflix who are using eBPF to sort of debug and performance optimize the network stack in the Linux kernel, because they were running multi 10 gigabit cards, and they were not getting the performance that they expected. And it's a fascinating insight to what you can do with that. Now we do have some questions forming. So Neil, who we were just talking to in the virtual booth, goes on to say, is DockerSlim dependent on Docker/Moby? We use Podman and Nspawn for our container runtimes in various contexts instead. And he sort of alludes to the fact that, with some of the situation around Docker Desktop recently, that they're moving away from that. So I think you just moving away from Docker Desktop, Neil, or, Docker in general. But he asks this question, does it require Docker?
I think it's kind of similar to the evolution Kubernetes went through, for example. Docker used to be kind of the default built-in container runtime, and eventually it got abstracted through a container runtime interface, and then you ended up with different pluggable backends, and that's where DockerSlim will get to as well. It doesn't support other container runtimes, but it can eventually. So that's something that people asked a few times. Asked about Podman. That's one. One of the other backends, probably something that will happen sooner, is supporting containerd directly, and using Lima. So Lima is this kind of it's kind of similar to the Docker toolkit for Mac OS and Windows. I don't remember if they had it back then, but what it is, it's a VM that runs containerd, and it kind of provides integrations with your environment. And that's what the Docker toolkit did originally before Docker Desktop existed. So it's one of the Docker Desktop alternatives, and it's kind of low level, lightweight, that kind of makes sense to support that. The good news is that like if you have Podman and Docker Desktop and all of that, there's already containerd in there anyways. So containerd is just something that's running behind the scene, and it kind of represents the lowest common denominator. And containerd is the official container runtime for Kubernetes. So it seems like a natural place to start supporting when supporting multiple runtimes. And then Podman will probably be later on. But we do need cycles. We do need help. And that's actually one of the things we want to do. We want to be able, as we grow, we're looking for people to help us work on things like that, being able to support multiple runtimes, because we don't get to spend enough cycles, and we want to be, we want to significantly increase the investment there, and
Okay.
supporting multiple runtimes, basic things like different installers for different environments and different package managers. It seems straightforward, but it's super helpful, and something that we didn't get to. Martin had a nice install script contributed, so that's a good stepping stone towards bigger and better kind of support for other environments.
Yeah, so I'm going to totally nerd snipe Neil now. So Neil did confirm that as a general rule, they're moving away from Docker as the runtime, kind of fueled by the recent changes in the way that Docker Desktop is being made available. And our colleague Peter, who's also in the chat, has gone on to say that they've actually been hearing this from people that they've been talking to at KubeCon this week. So maybe this is, a trend. People requesting different container runtime support in their tooling. But there you go, Neil. What you just heard.
One more thing to add. Yeah.
Go on.
There will be a mode where there's not going to be an external runtime at all, kind of a lightweight mode that has everything in it. So it's definitely something, and it's more common when it comes to building images. This is where things started way back before the recent changes with Docker Desktop. People would ask, can we build container images without Docker and all of that? So that was a common thing.
So Neil seems happy with these answers. So I guess, Neil, the GitHub project is Docker. I think it's Docker-Slim, isn't it? Docker-Slim. That's rotating beneath us at the moment. Pull requests welcome, Neil. Totally nerd sniping you there. I know you're capable of doing this stuff.
It doesn't need to be pull request either. So that can be a lot of work. Just useful information to simplify the integration is good too. It's like, here's useful information to do that kind of integration. If you have a few links to share, open an issue, paste those links in there, and that's a good start.
Right.
It doesn't need to be like a huge code commit or anything like that.
Okay, that's great advice. So there you go, Neil. I see you've joined our Discord. You know where to find us now. You've known where to find me before, but I'm more than happy to help guide you on this, and we'll see what we can work out. It would be nice to have a go at something like this. I'm also being told that one of my friends and colleagues is apparently is he at the booth, Peter? I don't know. Anyway, I see there's other so I'd like to welcome back Eric and Takov. I see a number of our friends from the community have stopped by. If any of you have got questions about DockerSlim or SlimAI or container tech in general, feel free to offer those up. I'm just going to have a quick look at the timer. So we've been streaming for approximately 20 minutes. I don't know how you're doing there. I know you're trying to persuade your computer to sit battery life at the moment.
It says I have about 45 minutes. It's probably I don't believe it because it's one of those things that it always shows you more battery life, and it's a lot less. There's nowhere to plug in for me, unfortunately. Like I had the other computer on first, and the batteries almost ran out, so I picked this one. And for now it's holding. So yeah, we have time. We can talk about other things as well.
Yeah. So Neil did just offer. He said, "Is the name a problem? DockerSlim because of Docker Inc."
No, actually, a little bit of history. DockerSlim started as a hackathon project, as an official Docker hackathon project. So from day one, they were okay with the name. And the DockerSlim project, it won the first place in Seattle. That's where I live. And then it got the second place in the plumbing category. And I still have the t-shirt and the sweatshirt I got from that hackathon. So they're okay. And some of the early traction behind DockerSlim were thanks to the Docker company. They mentioned it. It was mentioned on one of their blogs, and then we had discussions with Docker CEO like a few weeks ago. So it never came up as a problem, so far so good. We're not trying to we're doing different things, and we're not trying to monetize the name, and that's usually where the problem is, when somebody's trying to monetize their name.
Yeah, Neil's also citing. So Neil is a Fedora contributor, and he's talking about an issue where the Fedora team were asked to rename Docker Engine to Moby Engine in the Fedora project by Docker. And I know from my time at Canonical, there were similar conversations going on about the name of Docker when it wasn't coming from them directly. But there you go.
Docker Engine. That's right. The engine. That's directly kind of related to the product they have. And this is not a container runtime. So yeah. So that's, I would say it's different because it's a kind of a product or a tool that directly competes with the product that they have. And they definitely don't want they don't want their name on somebody else's tool or something that they don't get to monetize.
Right. Okay. Well, there you go, Neil. I hope we've been able to answer those questions of yours. So earlier on in the virtual booth, I was asking you, the origins of DockerSlim. But then, of course, the follow-on from that is SlimAI came into existence. So, how did that come about? How did SlimAI sort of form around this project that you'd created?
Yeah, it's really, like I mentioned, DockerSlim is a great way to validate the concept of application intelligence and the application-centric approach focused around containers and a specific use case, specifically building production-ready containers. And the idea there is that when you understand the application and what it does, what it is, and what it needs, you have an opportunity to automate a lot of things that have to be done manually. But there's a lot more that can be done with this concept, and a lot more places where it can be used, a lot more use cases in the entire DevOps lifecycle that has these high-level buckets: authoring, build, deploy, and run. Like if you look at all of those buckets, there's a common theme where you have similar problems where you have to know a lot about the infrastructure. You have to do a lot of manual work, and it applies to containers and beyond containers. And it seemed like a universal problem. It's a generic problem with DevOps. You build it, you run it. Sounds great, right?
It does sound great.
So developers are empowered, but now application developers need to be infrastructure experts. And that's just hard. It's unrealistic. Web application developers, for example, they barely manage to keep up with the web frameworks and what's going on there. And it's completely unrealistic to expect that they all of a sudden become infrastructure experts doing two jobs at the same time. And it's two jobs because, and what's interesting is that a side effect of this disconnect is this interesting development where the DevOps jobs ended up being created. Because application developers are not infrastructure experts, we ended up with DevOps engineers, engineers who understand infrastructure and maybe automation around infrastructure. That's a side effect of this disconnect. You introduce the concept of DevOps, but it doesn't really align with reality. So naturally, this whole new role emerged to fill the gap. But it is a hack because now you have two different teams, people, one team understands the applications, and another team understands the infrastructure, and there is a disconnect between them, and there's still a lot of manual work, and even more work because now you have two different people. It's not one person doing all of this work. So now you have the communication kind of friction, and it takes much longer going back and forth, trying to get something to production. I've seen that many times at different companies with different technologies. And it all kind of goes back to this whole idea of kind of DevOps, but there are all those problems that, you can be an expert in infrastructure and an application. And even if you know something, you don't always know everything about the application. So there's an application is like an iceberg. There's a little bit above the water line, but there's a lot more behind the scene that you may not realize. So it's actually a lot more complicated. And when we started talking about these problems and how big and universal it is, and how it's really a generic DevOps problem with John and others, we realize that it's a huge opportunity, and like at our previous company, CloudLock, we went through this effort to get FedOram certification, and a big part of that was developing this new not cloud native, but like infrastructure as code kind of environment. With Terraform and all of that, and we ended up doing a lot of things manually, and that was kind of a great example of how difficult and challenging it is doing DevOps right now. You focus on those great things with building and running and empowering developers and kind of quickly iterating, but it's not that. There's a lot of manual work involved, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of expertise. And like I said, it's kind of like writing assembly, cloud infrastructure assembly. You need to know a lot. It takes a lot of time, and it's hard to keep doing that. And it doesn't have to be that way. And it applies to containers and beyond. But we're focusing on containers because that's a good place to start. Containers are a fundamental part of the cloud native infrastructure. But we'll grow beyond that. For example, serverless, same problems. We experienced problems like that, like with serverless, where we couldn't deploy our user portal because, like way back, because the deployment package was too big, it was too fat. And with serverless, you have a lot of gotchas and constraints where those kind of problems surface sooner and in a more significant way, where we couldn't deploy. That was a big deal. So it applies the same problems exist beyond containers, and it'll be great to apply them as well. So it ended up being a big problem, and it just made sense to build a company around it, because it's not something you can do with a part-time open source project.
Right, indeed. So there's a couple of things there. You've used that sort of assembly metaphor a couple of times, and I saw Big Pod celebrating the fact that, yes, thank goodness for higher level languages and not having to, deal with that in the modern era. And I know the camera behind me is a little bit blurred out, but if you can squint hard enough, you probably can see there's a VIC-20 and a Commodore 64 just behind me, and I did grow up with assembly, and I still dabble with that for fun, not profit. But yes, it's always a culture shock going back to those kind of environments.
Imagine writing a modern web application in assembly.
Right. I mean, I struggle to write simple games in assembly these days, and it's something that's at hand, or front of mind. So Big Pod goes on to say that yes, there is a lot more under the surface, and he got an appreciation for that when he was working on getting .NET applications to play nicely with DockerSlim.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello, Esme. Thank you for stopping by. Yes, I did grow up with assembly. Yeah, well, it was kind of standard fare back then. So now that we've formed SlimAI, so much influenced by DockerSlim and the sort of extra agility and velocity that it gives to developers, what are you working on in SlimAI, the new Slim developer platform, that excites you most for sort of the next feature set that people are going to be able to use?
So there's actually a lot of things going on, and we have a lot of things already. So we talked about the minification capabilities, and we had a good question about what does it mean to minify during the virtual booth session. So, and we actually started with that initially with the SaaS, and one of the things that we kept hearing, and we actually heard that with DockerSlim itself, people ask, so what exactly did you do? What happened? So now I have this small container. What did you remove? That was one of those fundamental questions that came up over and over again. So we ended up refocusing on visibility, because visibility is one of those fundamental components that you need to have in order to do other things. Pretty much a lot of other use cases depend on visibility. So we started with that, where you can, find container images wherever they are. So you see the images in different registries. That's kind of related to visibility, and there are a lot of interesting opportunities there. So we're just starting with that concept, kind of like Google for container images. Right. We do basic search for now, but there's a lot more interesting opportunities to do more advanced searching capabilities, because we have a lot of context about the images, and that's going to be super powerful and super useful, not only for the public images, but also for the internal images people have in their organizations. That's actually where there's a lot of interest on the on the bigger company side. They care about visibility in their engineering organizations, because there are a lot of teams, a lot of environments, a lot of services running, and it's really hard to track where things are, where they live, and where they run, and how they're used, and all of that. So we're going to be expanding that. And then visibility within the container images, providing we provide a number of insights and kind of an interesting way to understand what's in them. But there's a lot more that can be done to understand what you have. For example, there are a few use cases where it's important. First, starting with the right image.
Right.
One of the things we talk about, how do you know it's the right image?
Mm-hmm.
How do you make that decision? Like you're looking for containers, you search containers, lots of different registries, and then you have a number of candidates. Now you need to make a decision. So you need to qualify those search results and then to pick what you need. And that's one example. Another example is when you already have your containers, infrastructure containers, supporting containers, or your application containers, and you're releasing. When you're releasing, you also need to understand what you're releasing. And you need to understand what's going on. And when things break, you also need to understand what changed as well. Because imagine you didn't change anything in the Docker file, but all of a sudden you deployed and things don't work. What happened? Where do you go? How do you understand the change? So we have a lot of different capability. So for developers doing debugging and troubleshooting, that's one of those great tools that you'll be able to leverage, and that's something that's super unique. We want to do more of that, and we want to provide more insights and higher level insights in terms of what changed and what's inside. So kind of taking it to the next level in terms of what you get there in general visibility and change insights and all of that. And we're also trying to expose minification as well. I mentioned that we started minification first, but we went kind of took a detour into visibility because it's one of those fundamental dependencies. Now that we have that, we also, leveraging the visibility to simplify the minification flow. So if you don't fall into the happy path with minification, you need to add parameters and you need to configure certain things. When you do it with the DockerSlim tool, it's kind of a lot more work for you to know what to configure. For example, if there's a database string, a database environmental variable that you need to configure, you need to know about it, that it exists. You need to know the name of it, and then you need to know how to use it. So by leveraging visibility, we can streamline that process. For example, surfacing the environmental variables that are there, telling you that, guess what, you have these environmental variables. This looks like a database string. It looks like your container image has a dependency on a database. Do you have an external database, maybe Mongo in the cloud running? So, please put that value there. Or if you don't have one, maybe we can provision one for you. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to introduce minification and a streamlined and a simplified minification process for the more advanced use cases. So it's easier to deal with more complicated use cases. And we do want to improve the happy path and expand the happy path where things happen. And one of the newer capabilities that kind of simplifies this in DockerSlim is related to leveraging Docker Compose, where initially Docker Slim focused just on a single container image, but a lot of times your container image is not alone. It doesn't run on its own. It has dependencies. For example, there's a database dependency, and with the recent Docker Compose support, it makes it easier to deal with those kind of environments where you have your target container image that depends on other things. And if you have a Docker Compose, you just say, hey, here's the Compose file, and then, hey, I want you to minify this service in the Compose. So it provisions the dependencies from the Compose, and then it starts the target service and it hooks up all the plumbing for you. And before that, you kind of had to manually specify the network to connect to, because there's a number of examples in the examples repo for DockerSlim that have compose examples, and there you need to start the compose dependencies first, then you need to write down the network name from that compose deployment, and then you need to specify in the network parameter to DockerSlim.
Right.
So now with the compose support, now you don't have to do it manually, it does it for you. So we want to expand that in DockerSlim as well, and in the SaaS, so it's more streamlined, so you don't have to do things manually, and we leverage the visibility that we get there. And one of the other things we want to do, kind of going back to the registries, there's a lot of interesting opportunities there where when you have a lot of registries, it's really up to you to get the container images to the right registry. If you're using container-based Lambda in AWS, you need to have your container images in ECR.
Right.
And it needs to be in a certain location. Same with Cloud Run in Google Cloud. It needs to be in GCR, and it needs to be in specific regions. So those are the kind of problems, container-related problems, that you still have to deal with manually, and it kind of falls into that kind of template of the problems that we can address. We understand the application, we connect to all of the container-related infrastructure, and we can help you get the container images where they need to be, kind of CDN for containers, and kind of simplifying your experience with container images. So we also have that work in progress, where we'll expand support for connectors, where we can connect to a lot more registries, and we'll build more around that capability, where we can abstract the registries themselves, and then behind the scene we'll be able to move things around and get the container images to the right place, and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the visibility features there. They've been extremely useful, in particular working with some of our community members who've been using DockerSlim to trim down their containers. And we've been able to use those diffing and exploration tools in the SaaS platform to really, in glorious Technicolor, visualize the differences between revisions of containers, and, as you say, the impact of running DockerSlim. What actually happened? What got removed? And oh my goodness, I see this directory of static assets is missing because that particular stimulation of the application didn't get down that code path and didn't discover that those are things that we needed to include. So it's been extremely useful. And I think
speaking of diffing, just
right.
One more thing. One thing I didn't mention explicitly, it's not just metadata level diffing, it's also content diffing. At least for text-based diffing. For binary diffing, that's something that we'll get to eventually. It's a little more complicated how we represent it, but for text-based changes, like certificate changes or your configuration file changes, this is also super powerful, where you can see that, I have a config file change from that version to another version, and I can make sense of that. So
yeah, indeed. Yeah, you mentioned the text diffing. I noticed there was a change to the time zone information as a result of that tooling. I was just rebuilding a container and happened to notice, hang on a minute, Etsy TZ data's changed, and I found out a couple of the Fijian islands are in a different time zone as a result of that. We had a conversation with Paymentworks earlier in the week, and I know that you've been doing a lot of work with them and their dev team. And they're really trying to sort of bring a GitOps workflow to sort of their container lifecycle management, which I know that that's not something that we have in the sort of the publicly facing platform at the moment, but I know it's coming along, and I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, it's kind of related to that kind of the abstraction for the registry. So what we want to do, we want to make it easier for developers, so they don't have to know about the different registries. So we want to provide an interface for all of those registries, and we also want to improve the user experience around the registries. For example, when you look at a registry, you get a flat list of images, which is okay when you have a couple of images, but when you have a lot more, it becomes a lot more challenging to work with. So one of the concepts we're introduced there is the concept of collections, where you can group containers into collections based on a specific criteria, and then based on that concept, we can kind of leverage that for some of the deployment use cases and GitOps in a way. So when you have a collection of images, one of those collections could be an application-related collection that represents the container images you need to deploy for an application. So when you have that kind of collection, there's also an opportunity to provide something that kind of converts or transforms this collection into the deployment artifact or deployment manifest for a particular environment. And what we're experimenting with is simple Docker Compose based use cases, where we transform a collection and the current state of it into a materialized Docker Compose that's deployable. And then you use your standard deployment tools to deploy that. And that kind of follows the one of the principles, where we're not introducing a new tool. So we're not introducing a new tool for you to use to deploy, but help you get the artifacts and components that you need to use with the tools that you already have.
Yeah.
So you have Docker Compose or the AWS CLI that supports Compose files. We get you those artifacts that you need there. We just help you automate the stuff that you need to do otherwise. So and that's one of the important things that was a major part of DockerSlim, not asking for change and not introducing new tools for you to use instead of the tools that you used to use. It's kind of filling those gaps and automating the things, the manual things, the hard things, and then letting you use what you use, like letting you use the base image that you use, the package manager that you use, the packages that you use, letting you use the deployment tools and the other infrastructure tools that you already have. So we're not asking Paymentworks to replace the standard tools with our custom tools. We augment that, and we kind of accelerate their process so they can be more efficient with the standard tools.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for sort of rounding that question out there. So I know that it's lunchtime where you are. I think it's that's all about to open, and maybe the show floor behind you is about to get quite busy. So I don't have any other questions from our members in the chat here. So I think this is probably a good place to wrap this conversation up. Thanks very much for joining, Kyle. That's been fabulous.
Awesome.
Is there anything else you want to add before we put a bow on this?
Yeah, a couple of things. The SaaS is open. Give it a try. There's a lot of interesting things, but if you try one thing, try the diff. Scan Nginx, pick a couple of versions, see what it looks like, or if you have other container images, pick those. Try the connectors. We have support for a number of connectors, and one of the things that we're curious about is the kind of the user experience around setting up the connections. Because with some of the environments like GCR, it's a little more involved. You need to do a lot more, and we want to understand if it's too complicated to go through the process. So, kind of providing feedback there, and then also try DockerSlim and see if there's anything that breaks, and if there's anything that breaks, open issues.
Absolutely. So for anyone that's wanting to take up that challenge, That's the URL above my head. You can join the Slim Developer platform there. Those invite code seats are open, so anyone can come along and give that a try out. And if you've got any questions and you want to follow up with us, then again, in the site above my head, you will find links to our Discord and our discourse communities, and you can continue the conversation with us there. So thanks very much, Kyle. I hope you have a lovely lunch and enjoy the rest of your time at KubeCon. And we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.